welcome to F4 Talks. With me is Leo Vivas. Leo Vivas has been a long-time author at Fair Observer. He is one of the leading thinkers on Latin America. He is from Venezuela. And today we will be making sense of all that is going on in Venezuela. So welcome, Leo.
Hello, Atul. Thank you for the interview.
Thank you, sir, for making the time. So paint us a picture of what is going on in Venezuela. We know there have been elections. We know that the government and the opposition both are claiming victory. We know that most observers hold that the elections were not free and fair. We know that Nicolas Maduro is clinging on to power. So give us more depth, more details, sir.
Yes. Well, I would say that this has been a very, I would say, like a year of very important changes in Venezuela that led to the situation we are having at the moment. I would start by saying that I won't give a lot of background about Venezuela because. But I would say that about a year ago, more or less, I would say perhaps earlier, more than a year ago, the Venezuelan government decided that in order to continue their strategy, which at the time was what you could call a quote unquote authoritarian normalization. And meaning by this, better conditions for economic growth, bringing down inflation, asking for foreign investment, and that through very, I would say, strong efforts to bring Venezuela back to the international community, establishing better links with United States, and possibly after that with Europe, and trying to normalize the situation with the opposition. And the reason
let me very quickly stop you for a moment. So remember, our audience is global. Some of them may not know where Venezuela is on the map. So Venezuela is in South America, Latin America. It is a country with oil reserves. It is a country which was ruled by Hugo Chavez, who was a populist, a caudillo, the Latin word for a strongman. And he was succeeded by Nicolas Maduro, and the regime has been authoritarian. It is left-leaning authoritarianism. And how many million people now, Leo? Venezuela? I'm forgetting.
Depends how you count it.
A lot of people have fled as refugees.
Has a population nominally of 31 million people, but of that, a total near to 8 million are left the country in the last 10 to 15 years. So that's
huge refugee crisis.
It has been a refugee crisis that has affected mostly the neighboring countries, like
Colombia,
that has near to 3 million people, Brazil with more, just about 500,000, but other countries, as far as Chile at the end of South America has close to 700,000. And Peru has a big number, and only in the U.S. it's close to 400,000, and in Spain and Italy, everywhere. So
in a nutshell, the country has been in crisis. The economy went through a meltdown. In fact, Venezuelans went through hunger. Some were bordering on starvation. The average weight of children went down. The height reportedly of young children went down. So apart from the regime, no one really was prospering. Even the oil sector, historically, which has funded Venezuelan coffers, is not doing well because of underinvestment in the state oil company. So all in all, an all-round crisis. And in the midst of that crisis, of course, not exactly in the midst, there was a period of authoritarian normalization, as Leo has just explained to us. And after that period of authoritarian normalization, we had in elections. And now, of course, it turns out those elections have not been free and fair. Over to you, Leo.
Well, there have been some elections prior, but in most of those elections, except for, one or two, uh, there have been very important, they have been rigged to an
Mhm,
important extent. Uh,
mhm,
but I'll come back to that.
mhm,
But the issue is that after this period that you are describing, because uh, the collapse of the economy had to do with huge inflation. Inflation, million% per year at some point in 2015, 2016. And it was that and the collapse, as you described, of the oil economy that led to this wave of people leaving the country wherever they could go. I have uh, been in contact with migrants that have been to in the last 6 or 7 years through easily 6 or 7 countries. Uh, but anyway, uh, in the last year and a half, the economic situation has gone better. Those levels of hyperinflation were dominated, and inflation has gone down still to 2 digits, at the high 2 digits. But the trend has been that inflation has been going down. There has been some growth in the country, some investment, especially in the capital city. So the project of Maduro was to extend this period and reinforce it. And for that, it required a political, kind of normalization. And that was the bet that they had. And they said they started conversations with Venezuelan opposition, and was called the Barbados Agreement, which took place during last year and ended in October of that year with an agreement. And in parallel, the Maduro government had been in conversations with the U.S. trying to get rid of sanctions that had been imposed on the country at some point. Okay, so that is the picture that was taking place. So the first point of agreement of the Barbados Agreement was said, well, let's head to a more, to a better conditions for elections, presidential elections that were, that should take place this year. And the first decision was to allow the opposition to have primaries, open primaries that they could hold and choose a candidate. Okay, so that was a bet. And why did the government do this? Because until that point, the opposition was in disarray, because the opposition tried every type of strategy to get rid of Maduro. Electoral. You had times of huge protests, like in 2014, 2017. So
There was a
it
speaker at that time who was recognized by the US as the head of the government,
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, that they tried even a
Yeah,
parallel government.
yeah.
Why? Because in 2018, there were elections which took place, which were under terrible conditions that were not accepted by most of Latin American countries. Neither were they accepted by the US or the European Union and many other countries. So what the opposition did was they said, if these are illegitimate elections, so at the time, the National Assembly was dominated by the opposition, which had won in 2015. Of course, the government never allowed that National Assembly to work properly. You know, they kind of annulled most of their functions, like, you know, taking, like analyzing the budget or many other things. But in any case, what the opposition said was, if this is an illegitimate president, then we should appoint the president of the National Assembly as a substitute. And that created another period of what was called, you know, full enforceable sanctions by the US, full pressure in order to try to get rid of the Maduro government. Okay, that failed, as many other strategies failed in the past. So the conclusion of you know, most of the last, what, 25 years was that the opposition was very weakened, divided between different factions, without an agreement of what to do. No leader was recognized. It was, you know, in shambles. And that was why the Maduro government decided to put forward this strategy of political normalization, let's call it that way. So what happened is that, so the opposition was allowed to call for primaries, and that set a different situation in the country, because the opposition created a commission for primaries that was allowed to work, and they called any candidate that wanted to run, you know, for president to register in those primaries. And so far, so good for the government. But then, when the primaries started the process and you know, the discussion and people going to the regions, something changed, and it was that one single person, in this case, one candidate, Maria Corina Machado, you know, became the leader and won the primaries.
Yeah, I think we've discussed her before. You've mentioned her before. You've said she was running a very good campaign, and in a free and fair election, she would have won.
Absolutely. So this was the first factor that created a bit of uneasiness in the government. So they made a number of decisions and tried to stop the momentum that was created with those primaries. They started controversies with Guyana, the neighbor to the east of the country, because of problems with a territory that has been under discussion for centuries.
Essequibo.
Essequibo. That's a territory that is under discussion.
Yeah.
And it includes part of the Atlantic Ocean. So it's a very complicated situation.
Yeah. In fact, we have a podcast on that, and with maps and everything.
Yeah.
And it is true, of course, that the boundary was delineated, perhaps not entirely fairly, but to announce military annexation, or let's say military measures without discussion, especially after oil has been found in Guyana, is a little rich.
Right. And especially because Venezuela found no support in the region for that. Because, you know, and for me, the most interesting situation is that the strongest opponent to that policy is Cuba, because Cuba was from the outset the most important supporter of the right of Guyana to have that territory. I'm not going to go into the details if that is
Yeah,
correct, but,
absolutely.
but Fidel Castro, it was a very important policy. And you have all the Caribbean countries supporting that policy. And even
I
Brazil.
think if I may say something here, um, Latin America is in news for crime, for violence, but the one good thing about Latin America, in fact, all of Americas, is that interstate war is not a feature of daily life. The one good thing about Latin America now is that you're not seeing the sort of tensions that you see in the Middle East or even in Asia. And
Or
that
Africa,
is a, or Africa, indeed. That is
or
a
Europe,
jolly good thing. Ah, yes.
or Europe. So
Russia, Ukraine, indeed.
you're absolutely right. I mean, you can trace. You might have had three conflicts between countries in all the Latin American history. There was one particular one in the 19th century, and it was Brazil and Argentina and Uruguay against Paraguay, of course. Well, and that was in the 19th century. Then you had uh, another one, and there was a conflict that arose between two countries in Central America. And then there was another one which did involve military action between Ecuador and Peru due to problems of borders again. But that didn't last long, and they very quickly reached an agreement. And there was, all of discussions between Chile and Argentina about some part of territory. But, the Pope came and talked to them, and then that was solved. So you're right. I mean, Latin America has been peaceful, very peaceful.
Maybe it helps everyone is Catholic. The Pope comes and there's peace.
Yeah. Okay, so back to our situation is that Venezuela decided to counter the impact, the Maduro government, the impact of the primaries, scheduling a national referendum to support the idea that that territory was Venezuelan, and which involved the creation of special state of Essequibo, and and saying that any decision of the International Court of Justice was not correct. Venezuela didn't recognize their role in the conflicts, etc. So, and the question is, they call that the primaries took place the 22nd of October last year, and the primary this referendum took place in December. The early days, 7th of December, I believe, if I don't remember incorrectly. And they wanted to change the narrative and change the interest that the primaries had made, but it didn't. They didn't. And the result was that when the campaign, the primaries had become part, kind of the first phase of the campaign for the presidency. And if we look at what is the situation in January this year, after all these things that I just described happened, we find that Maria Corina Machado, who was a winner of those primaries, was far ahead of any other candidate, especially far ahead of Nicolas Maduro. So they tried several things. They disqualified Maria Corina Machado to run as candidate. And, but she still campaigned and campaigned and campaigned. And
But they didn't lock her up.
no, they didn't.
Okay.
Because that was part of the agreements and
Yeah.
the Barbados. And with
So that's a
especially,
little different to, let's say, the Russian method.
oh
Lock
yeah,
people up and then kill them.
no, no, no. It's a different situation. I have to
Yeah,
make distinction here.
yeah,
And
yeah,
because
exactly.
that has been discussed with the U.S. government. In fact, the U.S. government did a number of things, try to trying to signal what could be positive, better conditions. Like I'll give you the two examples. Two of the nephews of the wife of the president had been indicted and condemned in the United States for drug trafficking. And they were given, I don't know, 25 years in a New York court. And that was like 6 or 7 years ago. So they were pardoned. They were pardoned and they went back to Venezuela. So that was a signal that the US was giving to try to, you know, you give, I give, the give and take of how these deals take place. And another one was a very strange character uh, named Saab, who was, how to describe him? He was the caretaker of Nicolas Maduro's money. Because, I won't go into detail, but the amount of money that has been squandered by the Chavez first and then Maduro regime is counted in trillions of dollars.
Yeah.
And it is assumed that this person, Saab, uh, was a caretaker of Maduro's. How
So
do you?
they've squandered trillions and they've probably stolen billions.
Yeah, yeah, they
Okay.
stole.
But
No, no,
that's a
no, no.
familiar
They've
tale. And
stolen. They've stolen trillions, and they
okay, wow.
squandered double or triple of those.
Okay. But that is a familiar story, Leo, sadly, all across Africa, even in places in Europe and, of course, in South Asia. So this is a familiar story of elites stealing from the public
Yeah,
in many, many countries.
yeah,
So Venezuela is
yeah.
probably a
But
more
yeah, it
extreme
is.
example.
But look, and it happens in Latin America. It's happened in many countries in Latin America. But the extent to which it happened in Venezuela
Correct. That's the point. The
are,
scale.
and there's no comparison ever.
Yeah.
I think Venezuela had stolen, or this elite has stolen more money than the rest of the countries combined, at least in the 21st century. Okay, but this person that had been taken in a Cape Verde uh, airport, and the U.S. Asked for and there was a legal process in Cape Verde because the U.S. wanted to try him in the U.S. territory, and so there was, and in the end, the states got the person, and they tried him, and I'm not sure if at the end he was condemned or not, or if he was in the process. I don't quite remember the details of that. But the question is that Biden again let him free, which was kind of a second gesture
So a
that the
presidential
U.S.
pardon for this chap too.
So this was a second gesture that they were, they were willing to play ball.
Mm.
So, but the Maduro government tried, when they saw the difference in the intention of voters at the beginning of the year, and the difference between Maduro, so they did a number of things. They, as I said, they disqualified Maria Corina Machado, and they tried to not allow her to campaign. For instance, she cannot fly in Venezuelan territory. She can't. She is not allowed to take any plane in Venezuela.
So
And
she goes by car.
by car. And the interesting thing is that by car, she was able to campaign better because
Of
he was
course.
able to go to all the
Yeah.
potential
Then she can go to every village. She can
every
stop,
village.
you know.
And I can't show you any of the videos, but what started to build up after that was incredible. I mean, because people, she
Public
became,
enthusiasm.
no, more than that,
Okay.
Atul, she became a heroine, a hero,
Mhm.
and and even compared to what happened, to Chavez 20 years, 24, 25 years ago.
So she
And
has become a Chavez-like figure now.
in the sense that she is, that people love her, that people say that they would give her their lives. It's like, like Eva Perón, something like that.
Mm.
Okay, so
I hope
come.
she doesn't dress as flashily as Eva Peron.
No, she always wears, with jeans, very, very, very modest. The
Mhm.
thing is that come April, May, when we were getting close to the election, well, because she wasn't allowed to run, so the opposition had to decide what to do, and in the combination between her and what we could call the mainstream opposition that had united in an organization since last year as well, they proposed a substitute candidate called Corina Lloris. And the time for registering was getting closer and closer. And they did not allow her to register. It was not that they said you're not allowed to register. It was that because this is a digital thing you do on a website, they did, they locked and she couldn't do it. And
Mhm.
there was kind of like one day left or something. And the Venezuelan electoral system is a bit convoluted, so maybe I'll try to explain it. So
Well,
you
we are. I'm in Washington D.C. The political system here is convoluted too.
yeah, it is, but this is you have some weird parts here that you
Okay.
don't have in the U.S. system. For instance, uh, you have like the entire number of parties that have been registered and then who can propose candidates is about 25 or 26 or so, and only three of those were from the opposition, or well, I would say four, and let's say opposition that wanted to get Maduro out because Maduro had created his own opposition and he had changed the names of parties. He had done, a lot of changes there using, legal procedures and, well, won't get into that details of that. But the thing is that the legislation, electoral legislation, allows you to like have a candidate, okay, and change it one day before final registration is over. Okay. So there was this candidate that had been registered by one of the parties allowed from the opposition, and his name is Edmundo González Urrutia. And he had been asked 2 or 3 months before that to run as you can call a cover candidate. Because, it's like this phone you have here. This is the candidate, and then you can take him off and put another one. So that's
Very,
what,
very clever.
and what happened is that they didn't substitute him. The opposition, the mainstream opposition coalesced and supported this person, Edmundo González Urrutia. Oh, he's a retired diplomat with a long experience, a very, soft person, very, pacifist. He is a very, always calling for for peace and calling for dialogue of everyone in the country. And, different to Maria Corina, who was more on, like bad cop, good cop.
Hmm.
The thing is that in the end, this person became the candidate, just by luck, sheer luck, became the candidate of the opposition. So, but who knew this guy? Nobody knew him. And the thing is that 2 weeks after he was accepted, and he accepted, and he was uh, proposed as candidate of the opposition, a huge majority of all the support that Maria Corina had, and we're talking here about 70%, was transferred to this person in kind of a magician's hat situation. And all of a sudden he became almost as popular as Maria Corina Machado, and he started to campaign. Of course, he is, 75 years old. He's an older person, and he was not going in all those things that Maria Corina was doing all over the country. And just to give you a detail of what happened when that campaign started, is that Maria Corina would go to very faraway places, and the government started putting all sorts of obstacles. Like if she would go to a hotel during the campaign, next day the government would go to the hotel and close it down. And there was a famous example of a place where they went to have some empanadas, which are,
I know,
like
I've had them
okay.
with you, I think once or twice.
Yeah. So they went and
But
they
yes,
bought some
explain them,
empanadas.
explain them to our listeners,
Well,
those who are
empanadas
in
is
India or elsewhere or
made
Britain.
of corn flour, and it's like mostly fried, and they can have either chicken or meat or pork in it. They're closed, so it'll close, and you fry them.
Something like a fried dumpling. Think of it as a
Right.
Latin American version of a Chinese dumpling.
Right. And you have versions of that all over Latin America. The best are the Argentinians. If my Venezuelan compatriots, they listen to me, they'll kill me, but the best are the Argentinians. Anyway,
We want you to live.
anyway, they went to this place, along the road at some point, and they bought some empanadas. Next day comes the police and they close the place. And these are, two women that, very modest, as you can imagine, on the side of the road, and they closed down the place. Well, there was a huge campaign because you have 8 million Venezuelans abroad, and she
Mhm.
had tons of support, these ladies, and people started buying empanadas from every single place in the world, and and people in Venezuela sending, asking for their empanadas. It was like you know so all these things they tried to do to stop Maria Corina's campaign, and she was kind of a parallel campaign with Gonzalo Urrutia.
So it
Didn't
was a cat and mouse game in a way. The government trying to basically deter Maria uh, Corina from campaigning and setting roadblocks and using repression.
right.
And of course, Maria Corina going by road to all parts of the country and whipping up public support, and thereby becoming a sort of a Chavez or Eva Peron like popular figure. Almost it seems like a mother figure in the Latin
Yeah,
American context.
absolutely, absolutely. And I would like to say something about her is that she had been known because she had very radical positions against the government. She had been a member of parliament, and at some point when Chavez was in power, he went to the National Assembly, and they had a controversy, an open discussion, and they were talking about nationalization, expropriation of property, and she told Chavez in his face, expropriation is stealing, Mr. President. And after that, I mean, she became, but she didn't have a huge influence. But as soon as she became the center of this new movement, she began to change. And she began, look, there were one particular aspect of her campaign, I think, was the one that hit most the heart and minds of Venezuelans, and it was to bring together the Venezuelan family, because every family in the country has at least one son, one daughter, one mother, one father, a uncle, a cousin that is abroad, that had to leave. And what she was calling is bringing the two Venezuelas, the one in in the country and the one abroad together. And that hit a chord, and so people, when she was campaigning, people would be crying along the way, saying, I do want my father back. I do want my sister back. And it became so. And you know what? The government had no strategy. The government had thought last year that it would be, kind of the things they had ever done, that had done forever, and they lost it. They had no clear campaign. And then when Gonzalo Urrutia came as a candidate, this, very soft-speaking person, always, calling about dialogue and saying that, he would consider any possibility to appease the crisis and the fighting in the country. They didn't know how to. They did the things that they had always done and nothing. So that brings us to December, to Sunday 28th, 3 days ago. Oh, I was working with a commission that was doing kind of independent analysis of what had happened in other elections and why the government was always able to win. And look, they had a number of electoral strategies. I'll just mention one. Well, in Venezuela, the voting is automatic. You have machines, electoral machines. By the way, the first company that was used in Venezuela was Smartmatic, the one that Mr. Trump said that had, not from Mr. Trump, what's his name, the one, the former mayor of New York. He accused these company to be rigging the votes, and they had a huge demand, and that demand went to Fox, and Fox lost, and they did reach an agreement before a decision was made by the judge. In any case, the electoral procedure in Venezuela is very safe regarding machines. And why is that? Because as you enter the polling station, you give your ID card, your name is written down, and then you go and you use your fingerprint, and there is a machine that reads your fingerprint, and it says if you are the voter, the person that the ID card says you are. So and once that happens, it is that this particular machine reading the fingerprints that sparks the voting machine. So if it's not you, the machine will not operate, the voting machine. So it's a very safe procedure. Then the machine, once you vote, once it's no, I'm sorry. Once it's the machine is on, then it gives a piece of paper, and then on the machine you vote, and once you vote, it kind of spits a piece of paper saying for whom you voted. And then you bring this piece of paper and you put it in a, the traditional box. So you have two counts. The machine accumulates all the information, and then you have the count. And at the end of the process, you have a tally of all the votes, and you have the members of the polling center with participation of witnesses from all the parties, and uh, and then everyone signs and everything. So come come Sunday 28th, the voting, well, most of the polls that were done before that was showing a huge advantage of González Urrutia over Maduro. And we're talking here, Atul, you know, uh, 65% to 30% to 25%. Others said no, 55%. So, but the range was on average between 20 and 30% difference. And it was
That is huge.
huge. The government put out its own polls and said people that said no, it's kind of a draw, or the government's winning, and this is not true. Those are fake polls, and these are polling companies that have been doing this for decades. In any case, come the 28th,
Sunday.
Sunday 28th,
Yeah.
we go to the process, and the Maria Corina has alerted in all her campaign. She was said, let's create the most vast organization to defend the votes, not allow that the votes are rigged. And you had a huge machinery, let's put it that way, of people everywhere in every single corner of the country. And the government did changed people from voting stations to other voting stations, or they in place that you had polling stations with say 4 polling spots for 4 polling machines. Then they said no, it's only more polling stations with only 1 where they could control. None of that worked. So people went Atul Saturday night, one night before the elections. There were droves of people waiting in line at the polling stations before 12 hours before. And I'm not talking about 1 or 2 places. It was, I don't know how many. There was 30,000 polling places, and and I would say in the number of 1,000 of places people went beforehand. So come Sunday, people started to vote, and according to official figures, and the opposition was in agreement with those figures, 90%, 90 by 9 a.m., 90% of the vote of the polling stations were functioning. They were, everyone was in place. You had witnesses by all the political parties. Well, there was a number only, the 4 more important political parties are only the ones that participate, depending on the candidate. Or in any case, things were running great. And the exit polls were saying that it was 65 to 34, 30, because there were other candidates
What is the official figure after the elections?
Well, the official figure that, but before that, I'll say something that is important. So every single company of exit poll was giving González Urrutia a huge advantage. So when around 5 p.m. the government stopped the process and started, trying to bring the witnesses out of the polling place stations, and they said that there had been a hacking of the system, and that so by 6 p.m., which is the time when polling stations close, a good number of them were not allowed to transmit the data because, and it was kind of locked by the Electoral Commission. And but the opposition had many of those tallies in their hands. And not only the ones in the mainstream opposition, but other groups, including pro-Chavista groups that were supporting other candidates, had tallies as well. And so by at first it was 30% and of the tallies. And about like 9 p.m., the government, another thing, the representatives of the opposition in the, like the situation room where you get the counting of the whole process in the computers, they were sacked. They were not allowed to be in there.
Understood. So Leo, to cut to the chase, the election was not fair. Certainly, certainly the results, whatever the government says, those are untrue. So let's wrap up this interview. But before we do, it's really important to understand what lies ahead. What happens now?
Well, okay, they gave us these figures that that Maduro had won by had obtained 5 million and something votes, and that the opposition had obtained 4 million and something votes. They put Maduro with a, kind of not, it was not something terrible. It was kind of trying to normalize the fraud, the rigging of the elections. Okay.
Normalize the fraud, legitimize the result.
And then the National Commission said, "Oh, we have a winner, and the winner is Mr. Maduro."
Surprise.
And we have 80% of the votes, and with that percent, we declare that he's the winner. And the question is that with that kind of difference, you had to count until the last vote, because you could have, mathematically speaking, you could have a reversing of the data. The difference between the two was not enough. And maybe when they wanted to do this trick, they should have made the difference greater, because mathematically you could reverse the result. And that's happened in many elections everywhere in the world. In any case, people were mad, and Monday protests began. But the difference this time, Atul, is that most of the protests were taking place in the areas and the social places that had been dominated by Chavismo before. In the shanty towns, in some states that had been dominated by Chavez and then Maduro for many years. And because these people had changed sides, because their situation was, and the difference, and also there was a difference and the way of the protest, because it was very strong and, without fear, just going ahead. And there was a point on Monday, and there was this huge crowd of people that came 1 block away from the presidential palace. They did not have the intention to go. They were just marching through that avenue, and they were there. They didn't even try to break the police. They just, went to other sides. But there were some other places. And one thing that's very important symbolically, Atul, is that in 7 different parts of the country, statues of Chavez were brought down.
So very much like Saddam Hussein after the 2003 Iraq invasion.
Right. Like Saddam Hussein, but in Saddam Hussein, you had
Was a
the
foreign
American army
invasion.
after.
Yeah.
More like in Ceausescu. Was
Oh,
more
yes.
like
Very
it
good.
happened in Ceausescu, in
In
Romania.
Romania, I think when communism collapsed, exactly.
When the collapse of communism. It
Yeah.
was a very similar scene. There was one that was incredible because they tore it down, and they started, hanging, how do you pulling the statue for, I don't know, 1 or 2 kilometers. So I mean, the symbolism here is very powerful, because these people were not only fed up against Maduro, they were fed up against the main symbols of what Chavismo has meant for Venezuela. So the question is, look, Atul, me and other people, we were also trying to see if there was a chance for negotiations. Why? Because Maduro and others have been under investigation by the International Criminal Court. And the US has put many years ago a reward of $5 million to anyone who would give information for him to be captured. So if those things, look, in the case of the reward in the US, Biden or anyone can just, by a snap of the finger, eliminate those rewards. Yeah. In the case of the International Criminal Court, if the Security Council arrives to an agreement, they can stop the investigation if there's an agreement of the Security Council. And I'm sure that if he had lost and he had accepted that he lost, that could have happened. And the opposition was willing to put this forward and ask for the Security Council to stop the investigation. And those are the processes that have been taking place in so many other places. Transitional justice, it happened in Colombia, it happens in so many places. It happened in South Africa, it happened. Okay. So there were.
So to summarize, it's not just that Nicolas Maduro has lost the election. More importantly, Chavismo is under threat. People have lost faith in Hugo Chavez, who was once the patron saint of the country. He was genuinely, wildly popular. And people have lost faith in the system as a whole. So whilst the regime, which controls arms and guns and has a decent defense force, is staying on in power, we don't know when the ground underneath their feet might just slip.
Atul, I'll just tell you something. This morning,
Mm-hmm.
I was, contacting friends of what things could be done and here and there. And I get this phone call from Venezuela. And it was a dearest friend of mine, old friend of mine. I haven't seen him in maybe 2 decades, but we knew each other many years ago. And he was a diplomat. He's a retired diplomat now. And he was in Romania when Ceausescu fell. And what he told me is, Leonardo, keep up the faith. Because I was in Romania when Minister of Defense supported Ceausescu. And 1 month later, because of the protests that took place and the international circumstances, especially, Gorbachev and Bush father, trying
Bush
to,
Senior, George Herbert
George
Walker
Bush,
Bush.
Senior, they were trying to, they pulled the rug under Ceausescu, but also the internal situation. And he said 1 month later, he was gone. I'm not saying he told me that this is going to happen in Venezuela, but it didn't happen.
But
And
it
what
could happen.
we are
It could
witnessing in
happen.
Venezuela is protests and people. It's not that you have protests every day and the protests, but there is a sense of, I don't know how any government can have any sort of working political system with all the rage that has come out after they rigged the elections. So that is what they're facing.
So it's very much the feel of an end of regime era.
Absolutely.
Brilliant.
If it
Brilliant.
happens, we don't know.
When, we don't know, but it will happen.
I will tell you more. I will tell you more. The military in Venezuela are just, people have all these ideas about military, and military men are just Venezuelans like any others. I mean,
Yeah.
you did your military service. You were, so, military.
I was an officer in India, yeah.
That's what I mean.
In the IPS, yeah.
So they're people like any other, and they suffer, and they do,
Yeah, in particular, let me just very quickly say, in particular, the soldiers are common Venezuelans with the relatives in villages, with brothers and sisters who are suffering. So at some point, the officer class, which enjoys the fruits of power, may not command the confidence of the soldiers. And remember, Hugo Chavez was a young officer who turned against the elite at that point. So history could repeat itself. Anyway, on that note, Leo, thank you so much for your time. It's always wonderful talking to a Venezuelan with such rich experience. You were involved in reforms in Venezuela. Most people don't know that. You have taught in the best of universities around the world. You've lived in France and England, so you have a comparative perspective. Thank you very much. Here's hoping for all the best and wishing your family and your friends and everyone you know in Venezuela all the best.
Thank you so much, Atul. Thank you.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.